Hello, you found Capitalism Hits Home, and we have terrific news for you and for all of us. Julianna Forlano is joining Capitalism Hits Home. Yay! Welcome, Julianna Forlano. And now we can proceed. The famous Julianna Forlano, who's on ACT TV 4 days a week. Wow. At any rate, today we are going to begin our bi-monthly podcast, and we are talking to you out of a new format that we found together. Julianna, explain it.
Well, first, thank you, Harriet, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. I've been a longtime listener and a longtime fan of yours, and your work has affected me personally very greatly in exactly the way I think we both want this podcast to help the people who are listening. We want to be able to provide information. We want to be able to provide context and context so that we are liberated from some of the, listeners are liberated in hopefully the same way I was from the way that the patriarchy and capitalism would have you believe about yourself. We want like healing and information to come from this. And that's why I'm very excited to be a part of this. So thank you for inviting me.
Good. And we also want militants to come from it. We want people to get out there and make these wonderful possibilities come true for ourselves and our families.
Absolutely. So Harriet let me tinker slightly with the with the formatting. So what we're going to do with her ideas and agreement was that we're going to present at the top a couple of news stories we think that are interesting, and obviously we're tying them to our main focus, which is the intersection of capitalism, class, and personal lives. So quick review of top 3 stories with that in focus. And then we're going to take a deeper dive on a topic of so far our choice, but we are going to invite you, if you're watching on YouTube or wherever it is that you're watching, to put topics you would like to hear Harriet and me, but Harriet mostly, discuss and give her opinion on. And we're happy to take the topics that you want as well. So with that said, I guess we'll just jump off, right? And go straight to it.
Let's go.
Okay. All right. So I'm really this is my first time on this podcast and as a co-host on this podcast. And it's a perfect week to start for me, as I was thinking, talking about how capitalism hits home, because we had the pinnacle, the quintessential capitalistic thing happen. Last week, I'm sure you all know by now, Bob Woodward released his audio excerpts of his interviews with Donald Trump that happened in a long time ago. I say he should have released them earlier. Anyway, that where the president said he knew how much deadlier COVID-19 is than the flu, even as he was declaring the opposite in public. And then several weeks after that, Trump acknowledged to Woodward that he was playing it down because he didn't want to create a panic. And what he meant was he did not want to create a stock market panic. He actively played down a virus that at this moment has killed almost 200,000 Americans, not to mention the rest of the world. 200,000 of our fellow beloved family members are, so obviously this is the pinnacle of capitalism. He chose money over the betterment of people. Harriet, your thoughts?
Yes, well, there's also, in addition to the almost 200,000 dead, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are handicapped for life, who have lung issues, who are teenagers and young 20s who will be in wheelchairs for the rest of their lives. So he has murdered and maimed on a level of carnage which is crazy, and all because he's protecting his own image and the stock market. So talk about no respect for human life. This is evidence above all that our lives are not as important as the money for his backers and for himself.
And not even to mention the people who only got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Just not even, I mean, a lot of times it's great that you expanded those numbers to include the people who are really rarely discussed, those who got COVID and quote unquote recovered. But for every human being that got COVID, there is a destroyed family, some, or, you know, who either got the disease or who died from it. Not to mention the fact that the rest of us are all suffering, from the young kids who have no social contact with other children to the teenagers whose suicide rates are spiking. He chose the stock market over all of this, and now everyone is suffering. So it's a perfect day to start
Everyone and everyone's family is suffering, from the little kids who can't go to school and the older kids who can't relate to each other, to all the people who have a severely handicapped family member at the same time as disability benefits are being cut and people are restricted to their family lives and to their homes, where child abuse is spiking, where battery of women is spiking in the home, where people can't escape their family abuser. He has put our country into terrible chaos, partly because he quieted the rumor, partly because he sold our pandemic supplies, partly because he didn't do any preparation for the inevitable pandemics that everyone predicts in the World Health Organization. And so that he has failed. Our government has failed to protect us, and in fact, he has endangered us.
He is a quintessential true capitalist at the head of what is supposed to be about public service. And we're seeing the ramifications there. Harriet, you brought a story you wanted to introduce.
Yes, I did, which is very related, because in addition to not planning for a pandemic and protecting us, they didn't plan for the wildfires that happen every year on the West Coast. In fact, in the CARES Act, Trump gave a great big financial boost to the fossil fuel industry, which dries out the air, which is responsible for the pollution and the drying and killing of people with these wildfires, that their millions of acres have been destroyed. About 200 lives have been ended. And that doesn't count all the homeless who have been created because their homes burned or are impossible to live in. It's a disaster. And it's another failure of our government to protect us from a vulnerable situation, because already the climate is getting too hot and drying out the foliage, which ignites. They have a wildfire season every year. And what has happened is that as the fires burn, they dry it out further. Whole areas can't go outside. San Francisco, Berkeley, LA, I mean, all over the place. The skies are orange. They're full of dangerous particulates from the fire, and people can't venture outside. This is a parallel disaster to COVID and a parallel failure of our capitalist system to put aside the money and the scientific expertise to protect us.
Trump just Harriet, a question on this. Have you noticed, or are you aware of, the Trump administration's response? I don't even know if he's sending in like federal anything. No money. He's spending no money.
No, he's not, because he's saving the money to give to his sponsors. And
well, certainly so Oregon, Washington, and California weren't going to vote for him in the first place.
Right. They don't back Trump, and so they're going to burn. That's his idea. And it's as the empire of America declines, our government can't protect us from wildfire. It can't protect us from disease. It has failed, and we need to demand something very different.
Isn't it interesting that the party in the government who wants to drown government in a bathtub because they say it doesn't work did the drowning, did the undermining, and now is the one who doesn't respond to literally someone screaming fire? I mean, it's almost insufferable to be around people who say, see, look, government can't respond to these things. Look. And now they're kind of getting what they want. No government. This is what these
That's
people
right.
wanted.
And also, these people who are saying erase the government are taking in billions of dollars. They got billions of dollars of fossil fuel reinforcement from the CARES Act. They are getting billions in the 0% interest rate where they borrow money. And the government is buying corporate bonds, which directly sponsors the corporations. So the government is giving them welfare. And then with that huge money, they sell those bonds and then invest in inflating themselves in the stock market. This is a corporate welfare at the expense of everyone else. And so they don't even want to give people the $600 a week or
I have to
an
say that I
additional
feel that
subsidy like they do all over Europe. I just have to say that the European countries, the government pays between 70 and 90% of people's salaries as long as their jobs are reserved when they get out. And so the economy works. We don't do that here. So it's working for the top at the expense of the bottom. Once again, it's a failure that is hurting the mass of people.
I don't live in California, but I have friends there, and I once lived in Oregon. And the way this particular event is hitting me at home is the fact that I am seeing that no one is coming to help. Whereas in the past, at least there would be a fire department. And I think it's the same with COVID, where you're on your own. And I believe that that is having a psychological effect in the home. You know, not just not just that COVID is, we're all worried if we're going to keep our jobs, what's happening, our neighbor lost their job, this and that. It's the fires and the non-response from our government from COVID is basically like, you're on your own. And that engenders fear and causes people to work out of a place of fear, right? I mean, and then you don't always make the best decisions out of fear. I mean,
no, there's a
people want to
health
hoard
crisis
stuff.
in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
There really is. The emergency federal hotline calls have gone up over 1,000%. Crime is going way up because people are terrified and people are driven out of their minds because the inadequate protection they used to get is now stripped in the face of disease and fire. Your point, they don't even respond when someone calls fire. Wow. That says it all.
Harriet, on the plus side, we've got a story that you wanted to present about how people are fighting back, not necessarily against wildfire, but I'll just leave it to you because I thought this one was so interesting.
It's really, really important. Mexican women are sick of the neglect of murder and rape of Mexican women. And so they invaded and took over a huge building. They took over the Justice Department. There are thousands of them. They changed the portraits of these esteemed male leaders, gave them hair and lipstick and makeup, and they demand no more women killed. They were activated by the deaths and dismemberment of a 7-year-old girl who was raped, and by
a 7-year-old girl
who was abducted.
I'm sorry, I needed a moment for the shock.
The government did nothing about it. Another teenager was raped by 4 policemen, and they were not held to justice. And so that they are controlling the human rights building and changing the monuments. And they are, because their murders have been ignored by their government. And people, Obrador, who is supposed to be progressive, said, I don't condone destroying property. Well, destroying life, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. You can dismember someone's child or their own, a kid, or
Right.
rape someone, but that's fine.
But don't
disgrace a Maduro statue.
Right. And so that what is happening is, just like gays in the United States who won gay marriage in part to act up, went out there and confronted people. They are saying, it's enough. It's enough. And they have controlled this building. They've taken it over. They've changed it. They have their signs. And they're tired because they haven't been heard. And I think they are an inspiration to families and individuals in the United States that say, enough already. We're alone. We haven't been heard. We're getting sick. We haven't been heard. We're burning. We haven't been heard. If we have to get out there and occupy, as they did in the police headquarters in Portland, we will be heard. It's enough. And it's the most dramatic because women in Mexico have a very subordinate position. It's taken a lot for them to occupy this building.
Like dismembering
and to make their announcements. And they're an inspiration to all of us.
That is wonderful. Well, let's keep a pin in that story and keep watching what happens. Do you know if they have been met with any kind of serious resistance or oppression from the government?
Not yet. Obrador is being careful because he was elected as someone who would bring justice. And that justice hasn't been brought very well, and it certainly hasn't been brought to women whose rapes and murders are ignored. And this movement started with the maquiadoros who were murdered, and no one did a thing. And it's continued all over. And their theme song is from Argentina, and the name of it is Not One More. They don't want to stand by and be killed.
So that is good that people are standing up. Excellent.
Yes, even the people who are usually docile. They're tired of not being heard. And what they say is, we weren't heard, we tried. When we are not heard, we have to do something. And we have to show this is untenable. And it's an inspiration to Americans to do the same.
Are they asking for prosecution or protection for women? Do you know what they're asking for?
They're asking for battered women's shelters. They're asking for the government to prosecute murderers. They go to the police because they've been tortured, and they say, well, he's your husband. So in other words, if you are involved with somebody romantically, he has the right to kill you. And so that they've had enough. And they're asking that stop, that crimes against women be counted as crimes, which is simple but very radical for Mexico.
Well, this is great. We'll keep a watch on that and support them in any way we can with our podcast and our media. It's wonderful. I mean, you're not hearing anyone talk about anything these days because most people are talking about Trump's latest tweet and his personality. Okay, we know he's a narcissist. You're going to see what narcissists do. Stop being shocked. He's doing what narcissists do.
Every day he's doing it again. Exactly. Yeah. And he's lying.
So let's talk about the real stuff.
No. Yeah. Now we go on to our main story of the day, a discussion of Cardi B's big hit, Wet Ass Pussy, WAP. And the reason,
I love hearing you say it.
Not my usual vocabulary. But the reason it's really crucial is it brings up something very important in terms of protest, in terms of women, because it's a song. Cardi B is a feminist. She's a Bernie supporter. She supports abortion rights. She claims she is a feminist. And she is celebrated, as this song is celebrated by many third wave feminists. And
here, let's play a little piece of the song so that in case people are unaware of what has happened to our culture,
Yeah.
they can watch this little piece here.
So note
So
that
there you have it.
the song begins, there's whores in this house. And of course, the house that they're showing is no ordinary house. It looks like Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. It's an enormous, showy house. And there are women in it, Cardi B included, who look like they've been photoshopped to be mainly enhanced genitalia and not much else. And the basic message of the song is, we are selling sex and we are exploiting men. Men can't tell us what to do anymore. We're telling them what to do because we're manipulating their sexuality against them the way they have sexually manipulated us for centuries. And
Harriet, what were your first thoughts when you saw the video?
I thought, this is disgusting. Why are women sexually objectifying themselves? Why are they proudly saying there's whores in the house? There's whores in this house, as if it's noble to sell your sexuality for money.
I thought that voice in the background with there's whores in this house.
You know, I don't think it's noble to sell your labor to capitalists anyway. It's sometimes necessary, but not noble. And announcing there's whores in this house and proudly accepting the title whore because they are getting a chance to exploit men. It's the reverse.
I thought the voice, there are whores in this house, being a male voice, made a big difference. If they were singing it themselves and like celebrating, taking back the word, etc., I thought that would have had a completely different tone than having a male sort of this patriarchal kind of crushing beat that actually those are the words that got stuck in my head over and over because they're repeated for the whole entire song. I thought that had a really different message than what they seem to have been wanting to put out. And my first response to seeing the video was, I was like, yeah, because I was like, tell them those assholes. Like there was this part of me, and then I was like, but I don't want my kid to see this. She's very young, so hopefully she'll never see it ever. But, you know, I wouldn't want my kid to see this. What message is this putting out there? I saw it as kind of like a revenge. Like, if you're going to do this to us, then we're going to do this to you. And I did feel kind of good, not going to lie, after having lived under all the expectations and the crushing pressure that they are obviously fighting against. But then on further, I also found it like really gross that's how we have to do it. Isn't there some other ground where we can take back our sexuality without having to sell it?
Yes, there is. And I think the point you make is excellent because as a feminist and as a, founding mother of the second wave feminist movement, the idea was not to sexually objectify and use men, but to get out of a system of sexual exploitation of anyone. Because there are choices in any movement. You can say, okay, slavery should be abolished, or black people should put white people in chains. Have us do forced labor, rape us. Okay. Or end slavery, end the enslavement of human beings and treating them as property. And in terms of sexual objectification, where someone is not a human to you, but just somebody to sort of get off on, denying their humanity and using money to entrap women, women are using their sexuality to entrap men and take their money. So that they have the same exploitative attitude, but in reverse. So the lines like, put this pussy right in your face, swipe your nose like a credit card, that the idea is, I am going to trap you. And she says, I run down on him. In other words, I put him down, for I have a run in me. Pow, pow, pow. In other words, instead of having somebody beat me and put me down, I'll have a chance to beat him and put him down, rather than let's stop the violation of other human beings. Now, and it goes on to more and more materialism. It isn't end oppression because it oppresses both the victim and also the perpetrator, because it dehumanizes other humans with whom we need to connect. She says, now get your boots and your coat for this wet ass pussy. In other words, buy me stuff. He bought me a phone just for pictures of this wet ass pussy. Pay my tuition just to kiss me on this wet ass pussy. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And then later, he got some money. That's where I'm headed. Pussy A1, just like his credit. It also means that relationships between men and women shouldn't be based on their helping one another, their comradeship, their sexual intimacy, but in exchange, sex for money. And if you don't have the money, who cares about you?
I'm finding
It's
this
so
very
materialistic.
depressing. How am I going to teach my kid to have a healthy how am I going to teach my child to have a healthy relationship with her sexuality? You know, she's young. I'm looking into the future, but I think it starts early. You know, like I don't even know how to do that given this environment, this saturated media environment where this is, you know, considered a take back the night kind of a moment. Can you talk about?
It's a big pop hit.
Yeah, well, it's catchy. If you don't hear the words, you're like, hey, I like it. And then you're like, wait, what am I liking? Oh. Can you talk about the importance that it's actually like two Black women, you know, who are doing this? When Pop Sugar, I was reading a little bit about it. Pop Sugar, the way they put it was perhaps the only thing that could irk our patriarchal society more than seeing women unapologetically reclaim their sexuality is seeing not one, but two Black women do so. The exploitation and fetishization of Black female bodies is rooted in colonialism and free of both literal and metaphorical shackles. Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, the artists and who made this, are spearheading this new wave of female empowerment. That's how they put it. Can you talk about the idea that it's two Black women unapologetically reclaiming their sexuality, as they put it? Your thoughts about that?
Well, they are. Black women have been particularly exploited sexually. Just look around at the African American population in America. They're not really dark because they've been raped so much in slavery that there are a lot of people of every shade of brown. If you go to Africa, people can look purple almost. They're so black because they haven't had mass rape the way American Black people have had in slavery and thereafter. And so that they are responding to that, not by saying end exploitation.
I'm sorry, I need a moment just to take that in because, you know, all the colors of the rainbow and then you see, so when I'm looking at the face of an African American who is lighter complexioned, I am looking at a descendant of rape.
Yes, you are. And
wow.
Therefore,
I am never going to walk the earth again the same way. No, really. I mean, that is.
Walk around and you look at ostensibly Black people, you see beige, you see cinnamon, you see all sorts of colors. And that's overwhelmingly rape because slaves were routinely raped. And when Reconstruction was crushed and the Klan reasserted itself with Jim Crow, Black women were routinely raped. And if they tried to have access to abortion, they were routinely sterilized at the same time without permission. And so that there's been an assault, particularly on Black bodies, on women's bodies in general, but on Black bodies in an exaggerated way. And so that there are various ways of reclaiming one's sexuality. One way is to say sexual intimacy is important. Let's start with early childhood. Let's tell people the way they do in the Netherlands and Sweden. Let's give them sex education and not be so repressed by the right wing and the right wing prurient puritanical culture that kids get their information about sex on rape, which is heterosexual rape is routinely abusive to women. And so people are young, our children are educated by watching women be sexually abused and victimized, rather than using the Scandinavian and Dutch method, where you learn first about procreation, that the bee doesn't pollinate the flower and then it can't bloom. And then you go on in middle school to learning about your body and the bodies of the opposite sex, what's happening. And then starting at about 13 and in high school, you start learning all through high school about relationships and physical intimacy of relationships and responsibility for the children you may create through these relationships. So that it's based on relationality, which gives you a very different view than porn. Because this is a kind of reverse porn song.
Right. And it's not like men don't love watching it. They're like, yeah, do it to me. I mean, this article went on to say something about they're expressing themselves free from the male gaze. And I'm like, oh, I don't think so. If they were free from the male gaze, they'd be wearing a Snuggie, eating potato chips with their hand in their crotch, whichever way they felt like it. You know what I mean? Like women don't wear this shit for themselves.
Fat too. That's
yeah,
right.
We'd be nice and fat and happy.
Exactly. As Queen Latifah said, without men, there'd be a lot of fat, happy women in this country.
I'll tell you, and part of this is like, we'll probably go into this a lot because I have a major fear as we continue going down here, is like how to keep capitalism from eating my kid. And, my daughter, I don't know how this happened. I kept her away from screens, cartoons, but someone sent a gift in the mail that she opened and it was Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. And how she fell in love with them immediately, I don't know. Some beautiful marketing strategy where they made the face all in, and Minnie Mouse has her kind of rump up in the air and she's wearing heels and she's so
lipstick and everything.
I see my daughter posturing in the mirror that way to pretend to be Minnie. She was 3 years old at the time. And I was like disgusted. And I felt like, how am I going to protect her from, I know a mother's words are important and I'll do my best, but it certainly seems like capitalism, they want to sell women this stuff, the video, the Minnie Mouse, they want to sell you something and they want to make you feel like shit. So you have to buy more stuff. Because as you just said.
And what they want to tell you is a lot of makeup, a lot of diet regimes, a lot of clothing that over-sexualizes you. And then they want to sell products to men by showing them sexy women as if they have access to the woman's sexuality by buying the car or whatever else. And what Cardi B is doing, saying, yeah, I'll use your money, and you won't be using my sexuality without my permission. I'll be calculating that I'll be sexual basically with your wallet and not with you. And I have no personal interest in you, which is a dehumanizing experience for the woman doing it, as well as for the man receiving it, as it has been a dehumanizing experience for women to be sexually used by men. And so that what this does is it takes that money nexus and exposes it crudely. So, for example, I remember an interview with Melania Trump, where it's clearly, nubile flesh for money. Okay. Someone said, would you have married Donald if he weren't rich? And she said, would he have married me if I weren't beautiful? Okay.
There's your answer.
Woman on your arm in exchange for money. And when he paid off Stormy Daniels the $130,000 to keep their brief affair quiet, he mentioned to Michael Cohen, who was doing the paying for him, wow, Melania would have cost a lot more. So that his attitude is sex for money. And these women are saying sex and your money. I'm not waiting to be on the receiving end because of your generosity. I'm going to bilk you. I'm going to exploit you. But capitalism is an exploitative idea. You give me more, I pay you less and take the rest for myself to be rich. And so that I think the way we get out.
So when the women become the capitalists, they give only a dry ass pussy at the end, and then they continue to pull away all the things they're promising.
Right. No pussy, no money. Okay, no money and no pussy. I mean, I don't want to sell. I don't think that we need to use sexuality to exploit men. I think exploitation is an awful thing. And seeing people, in this case, she's seeing half the human race, the male half, as basic enemies with a vulnerability to take advantage of. So you can siphon out of.
How do we get out? I feel that capitalism is a mental illness, and that living under capitalism makes people mentally ill. And I, with all respect to the artists here, and who knows if they, I mean, they're selling stuff from this video, and here we are talking about it. So they're a success. In 4 days, I think it got 4 million views, or the video on YouTube. So it's considered a success in terms of I guess if you consider success like financially, but if you consider like how you affect the world, maybe or maybe not. I don't know where I was going with that. It's the mental illness is like, do people even know what it is to be outside of that mental illness? Like, unless you've traveled, do young people, even younger than me, even have they woken up yet? I mean, where are we with this? I don't think people know how to really have a real relationship based on what you said earlier.
No, they don't. I mean, they don't. If they're looking to porn for sex education, they're looking for the routine humiliation and degradation for women in heterosexual porn as a sexual connection. And also, increasingly, they can't have sex without porn on. It's a phenomenon where 1 in 7 people at a major university, I think it was the University of Kansas, the men said they couldn't have sex unless they saw porn. Women aren't enough. A human isn't enough. And a girlfriend isn't enough. And I think that what happens is the same pleasure centers that are excited in sexual connection with a real person are excited by pornography, which a man can control in a way that, even though he may try, he can't control women. And so that you have the market, which is a $17 billion market of porno. They take in more income than all the sports teams together, that they then overtake American sexuality, which is very sad. And I think a women's movement should champion men and women connecting as equals, loving each other, being intimate if they both want to. There are only 17 states that demand, out of all the 50 states, that demand medically accurate sexual education. And there's only 1 state that includes the idea of consent in sexual education.
What state is that? California?
I think so. I can't remember right now.
Wow, that's shocking.
But it's not in Dixie. We can be sure of that. But
right.
You have this perversion for money, the perversion of a human drive in order to make money. And I think that Cardi B is just reversing roles. She's not getting rid of a system of exploitation. When
how can you explain my joy at watching it? Because I was like, yeah,
because
get
it's
them, those fuckers.
revenge. Yeah, it's revenge. Look, in the early 1970s, I was in an organization called WITCH, the Women's Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell.
Ooh.
Yes.
Nice.
And one of our activities before women's liberation was known very well was getting off at the Wall Street stop with big balloons in our pants. We wore big pants with balloons like we had huge dicks, and following men saying, "Whoa, look at that ass! Look at the dick on him!" You know, and they were very embarrassed, and we had a lot of fun. It was just revenge, though. It wasn't. It was letting them know what it feels like to be sexually objectified. But here, women are using sex for money, and the idea is use everything for money. Use everything. Ask for a car while you ride that dick. You know, you have access to my body for money, and it's revenge on people. Revenge for people whose bodies have been accessed without their consent, Black women, without their consent, without their cooperation, without tenderness, without concern at all. But to then reverse it and be that way with another human being is not, I don't think, is healthy mentally for either party. So it's...
Can you do revenge for 5 minutes and then let it go? I mean... You know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's like, yeah.
Yeah, well, women who are objectified all the time, who are followed, who have men coming up to them, making animal noises and shouting comments on the street and trying to pick you up. Now, sometimes it's just trying to impress you with their credentials, that they are credentialed and therefore better sex partners. I remember my daughter telling me that at a bar, some guy came over to her when she was much younger, and he said, like, James Johnson, PhD, as his introduction.
Wow, who does
and
this?
He said, Tess Fried Wolf, STD. And he didn't know what to do because she was using her initials to mock him. She was using really degrading initials to mock him. But I think this is both a mockery and also a revenge. But by acting out in revenge, you're acting towards another human being in a way that I don't think humans should ever be acted upon. You're exploiting someone's neediness.
I know we're closing in on the end of our thing, but I would like to ask you another question, if you wouldn't mind weighing in here. How far do you think even not even a robust, but even a marginally useful social safety net would go to, free women from having to kind of be involved in these transactional type relationships? I never really looked at the lack of a social safety net as an attack on women specifically on purpose.
I do think that, especially after reading a lot about prostitutes, there's a book, Revolting Prostitutes, about prostitutes in revolt, and there's a manifesto that says that prostitutes never become prostitutes unless they're in desperate financial straits. That you are selling access not because it's fun, but because you're desperate for money. And so that if everyone was guaranteed a decently paid job, and you created jobs like they did with the last Great Recession, instead of what they've done now, useful jobs at decent wages, you would take care of that sexual use of people so much more expertly. That these things are desperate. There's a line, pay my tuition just to kiss me on that wet ass pussy. What? Because that's
free college education would ruin that one.
It would if
right?
you had free college and you weren't going to be in debt for 20 years. Why be a
Yes,
sugar baby?
exactly.
No incentive. So that, and if
Oh,
you
Harriet,
weren't indebted all the time because you were pushed for material things, it would be very different. So, of course, that would be transformative and important.
well, every conversation I ever have with you is transformative and important, and so I'm very happy to be a partner on the program that you founded and have made so wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me to be on here. I hope I'm helpful in some way,
Very.
and I appreciate it. Let's see. In our next program. So stay tuned for the next one. Our next program, we're
That's
going to be talking
exciting
about,
there.
yeah, we're going to be talking about children who need preschool the most, who are getting it the least. So that will be our next episode, along with some news stories that have been happening over the course of this apocalyptic year that we're all living through. I hope everyone stays well. This is Capitalism Hits Home. I'm Julianna Forlano with my fabulous co-host, or I guess host, and I don't know how that works.
We're both
Dr.
hosts.
Harriet Fraad.
Yes, co-host.
Yeah.
It's a
Final
joy.
words, Harriet, as we close out the show today.
Yes, welcome, Juliana. You are such a marvelous addition. And please stay tuned for the next podcast of Capitalism Hits Home. Thank you for listening. This episode has been brought to you by Democracy at Work. Please support our work. Visit our website at democracyatwork.info.